Welcome back to the Flip Side of Death podcast. I'm your host, Lynn Stone, and today I have a very special guest on the show with me. Author Jim Paulk is joining me today from his home studio in Kingsland, Georgia. Hey, Mr. Jim, how are you?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Fantastic. So, would you mind sharing a little bit about yourself with the audience?
Well, first of all, I'll tell you how I'm 92 years old.
Wow.
And I didn't get into book writing until my late 80s, and now I've done 3 books. And I'm originally from just a road up a little ways from Brunswick, Georgia. I was born and raised there, and I went to graduate from Glenn Academy in Brunswick, and went to North Georgia College in Dahlonega for a couple of years, and then I went to the Naval Academy and graduated from Annapolis in 1957.
Wow.
And served 5 years on active duty as a submarine officer, and then I spent 5 years in the reserves and worked for Procter and Gamble for my basic career, and retired from P&G, and then I got talked into running a 501c3, a marine conservation organization, and did that for 8 years, I think it was. And we built artificial reefs off the coast of California. We worked with SeaWorld and the Fish and Game and some other organizations to raise fish to put back in the ocean. And probably the main thing we did is we did an initiative in California to eliminate the gill nets off the coast. That was my first unbelievable challenge. We had to get 600,000 signatures in 5 months to get it on the ballot. And we got on the ballot and got it passed, and we phased out gill nets and got those out of the California waters. So we did that. And then I became so well known in California, all the magazines wanted me to do articles on fishing, and I did fishing magazine articles for a while. And then a friend of mine got me talked in doing a book. I didn't think I could ever do it, but he talked me into it. And unfortunately, I found out last week that he had died. And
I'm sorry.
That was a real shock. And I tell Rachel, I said, I can't believe he's gone, because he was, even though he was younger than me, he was my mentor because he talked me into doing books. But and I hope I can keep on going a little bit longer. I plan on writing as long as I can, and I enjoy doing it.
That's awesome. I'm sorry to hear about your friend passing away. I know that's hard whenever you hear those types of things, for sure. And so for the listeners, I had the great honor of meeting you last year during an author event that was held at your house. I don't know if you remember that.
Sure. I do.
But good. And, so you remember that I was talking about my book and what I was doing and why I wrote it and all that. And that's where I think we discovered that you and I have a very special bond. And that's because we're both walking our grief journey. And so before we start talking about the hard stuff, I warned you that there would be hard stuff. I'd like you to tell me a little bit about your bride. How did you meet? How long were you married? What was she like? That kind of stuff.
Well, I would tell you this. I had a girlfriend all my life. When I was 15 years old, I had a steady girlfriend. I mean, we went together for 2 years, and then we split up. And then I had another girlfriend my senior year in high school, and she told me, she said, "You're going to Annapolis." She says, "I'm not waiting around 4 years for you to graduate from Annapolis. I'm going to Georgia and find me a husband."
Okay.
I said, "That sounds right to me." And anyway, and so when I got to Annapolis, my second year there, my Georgia girlfriend decided that having a relationship with somebody that you only see a few days at Christmas time and a little bit in the summer, it's not much of a relationship. And so a friend invited me to go over to the University of Delaware for a 3-day weekend. And I said, sure, I'd love to go. And his girlfriend set me up with 3 blind dates. And I'm sure that number 1 and number 2 were great. But when I met Pat, I had never met anyone like her in my life. She just had an aura about her. She was, without a doubt, the most charismatic person that I had ever met in my life. She was incredible. And I didn't find out until later that she had just broken up with the captain of the Delaware basketball team and was just dating me as a favor for a friend. And she didn't plan on doing any other relationships anytime soon. But but I got a name and address, and I was not going to let her get away. I said, she's the most unusual girl that I had ever dated, and I said, I got to get to know her better. And I tried to get her to come down to Annapolis, and she had been to West Point with a friend that dated a cadet over there, and West Point didn't impress her, so she wasn't interested in coming to Annapolis. But I finally talked her to come down for a formal dance, and
Oh.
Navy had probably the best dance bands in the country that came there for the dances, and so she decided to do that. And so we agreed to meet on the steps of Bancroft Hall on Saturday afternoon, 2 o'clock. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I hope I can recognize her. And she was wondering the same thing. And I got to the steps, and there she was. She had on a sweatshirt with Delaware right across the front. But that was Pat. And we looked at each other and smiled. And I think our souls met at that time. But she had never dated anyone very long because they just, I don't know why. But she was probably the most authentic person that I've ever known. And I know she wasn't planning on a career in the Navy or whatever, but she wanted to be teach school, and she was going to coach. She was I didn't know she was such a good athlete, but she really was. She played basketball, and she ran track. She did the long jump, and she ran, I think, the 440 and the 800.
Wow.
And one time in California, I got a phone call, and she was at a meeting, of course, and they wanted her to come back to Pennsylvania for a reunion. I said, well, that's a long way for one night. I said, I'll have her call you when she gets in. And we talked a little bit, and he said, by the way, tell her that a high jump record is still good. I said, wow.
That's worth going.
25 or 30 years later, and I didn't even
Wow.
know she did the high jump, but summers, while she was in college, she was athletic director for kids camp, and she taught
Okay.
all sports and everything. And but she was a unbelievable person, and I think it was without doubt the greatest honor in my life to be married to her. And we were married for 60 years, and
Wow.
I lost her a little over 9 years ago, and but I still talk to her, and I still tell her I love her, and I will. I love her till the day I die. But she was an amazing person, and uh, she was probably president of every organization she ever belonged to, because not because she wanted to be, because they always wanted her to be the leader,
Yeah.
and she did everything so naturally. It was just nothing was ever a big deal for her. She could just do anything,
Wow.
and we had a wonderful relationship. And I think she was kind of surprised because she didn't quite understand being married to a boy from the swamps of South Georgia, and she was a city girl from Pennsylvania, and she was born in Ohio. Her father was a graduate of Ohio State, and her mother was a graduate of Toledo University,
Okay.
and they were Germans on both sides of the family. I said, I'm
Oh,
marrying
Lord.
I'm marrying a blue-eyed blonde Nazi. I know about that, but we were absolutely best friends and soulmates for 60 years, and it was just a wonderful relationship. And we had great kids and our grandkids, and now we have great grandkids. And I wish you were around to see there's two little girls that I see about once a week. They come over. The 3-year-old told her mommy, she says, Mommy, I have a new boyfriend. It's Pop Pop.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Yeah.
That's so sweet.
But
Well,
but Pat was an incredible person. Wherever she went, she was just the focus, not because she wanted to be. She was just a natural, authentic person, and she was just not. There was no makeup around her at all, and when she got dressed up, she looked like a movie star.
oh,
And
wow.
we go out to dinner in Newport Beach, California, a nice restaurant, something. Everybody was staring at her because in Southern California there were always movie stars around, and people always trying to figure out who they were.
Right. So they were
And
looking at her
but
wondering who
but
she was.
she was just. I put a picture in the first book of her, and I asked my publisher. I said, had a picture of her barefooted with shorts and a t-shirt on in the back of our boat, and she's standing there with a hand on my shoulder. She always had a hand on my shoulder. And I asked Angela, my publisher, I said, would you put this in the book? She said, no way you're going to put my picture in the book unless I'm fixed up as much as I can be. And so I asked the kids, they said, that's mom, put her in there. So she's barefooted in shorts, and she just looked natural. Her hair wasn't all fixed up or anything, but I'm happy that that's in the book.
Yeah, for sure. Well,
Yeah.
Miss Pat sounds like a lovely person. I wish I had a chance to know her. So how would you say things have been since she passed for you? Like how have you been since all of that?
Well, it's been really tough, and but I think we're both very strong-willed people, and both leaders, uh, and I don't know. I said you learn to cope, and you do so many different things. I did so many different things and many activities when I was growing up, and I think if you have enough confidence in yourself and confidence in the people around you, then you're going to be fine.
Right.
As I will tell you that when she died, I cried emotionally for about 3 months. I could stop crying. It was just I carried a towel around with me wherever I went because it was really sad and whatever. And I don't think you ever get over it. I think you learn to live with it. And I don't know whether coping is the right word or not. I'm not sure what the right word is, but it's there. And if I come in here and I will listen to music a little bit, sometimes I have tears running down my cheeks. It's emotional, and the emotion is always there, and it doesn't go away. Uh, and you hope you're going to be able to make it. And I'm fortunate that my kids, I call them the blonde team. I got all my blondes here, and I have three granddaughters. I have one grandson that's in California, and my two daughters are here, and my son lives in Jacksonville. So I've got a lot of family support, and they're just really helping me. And the person that helped me the most right now is sitting right over here behind me, and their name is Rachel.
Yes.
And Rachel's my nurse. She's my vice president of operations. She's everything. She's my fixer. She fixes everything, and
Yeah.
she makes life tolerable for me. And she's just absolutely wonderful. But I think you need to have a good support group. And
Yeah.
uh, the last book, I said we're doing two books, and the things that come out when you start putting together books of stories from others, because most people write about themselves, and somebody in the review of my first book said Jim always writes about other people, he doesn't write about himself. And I hadn't thought about that very much, but I always think that relationships are the most important thing in the world, and of course love is the ultimate relationship. And after doing two books and developing relationships with others that I didn't know at all, and some I didn't know very well, uh, it just brought into focus that I really wanted to do more on the relationship issue, and soon we'll have a book on relationships. And in fact, we have hired a public relations agent to help us with this book, because the way I'm looking at this is my contribution to humanity. See, I don't get any royalties from my books. All my royalties go to charities. And so
Fantastic.
this is my donation to humanity. And if I can help some people, inspire some people to keep looking for love, then I've accomplished something. And that's in the back of my mind.
That's a very powerful mission statement, is what what you have right there. Would you mind telling us about your three books? I know the third one's like almost there, but the first two. Can you tell the audience a little bit about your first two books?
The first book was called Swimming for Our Lives, and it's got some special fishing stories in there, and One of them was called My Old Man and the Sea, and it was the biggest marlin that we caught on our
Wow.
boat. It was one of the largest ones ever been caught in Southern California. It was 221 pounds. It took me an hour and 26 minutes on 30-pound test line, and it was Pat, and we had a young engineer with us that we wanted to get him a fish, but I got him hooked up and he came loose. And then when you get loose, you go to the back of the line. And so I went back around and he got hooked up again, and it's Pat's turn, and he came off. I said, well, I'm going to go back around and see if I can get him to go again. And then it's my turn. And so we hooked him up. Well, the thing was, after we got him to the boat, and I got a tail rope around his tail. We have a noose you put around the tail, and you pull him in tail first. And the three of us couldn't get him in the boat because the weight was so forward, and he was so long, such a long, big fish, we couldn't get him in. So I said, we're going to have to tow this fish in to get weighed in. So I tried to call Rosie, the weighmaster at Catalina Island, and the mountain was in the way, and I couldn't get her. And so, but I had a friend that answered that was out in front and said, Jim, I got the message. I'll tell Rosie to wait for you. I said, okay. I said, I can't go very fast towing this fish, so it'd take us a while. And so after a couple of minutes, I said, look, I read the book, Hemingway's Old Man to Sea. I said, the shark's not going to get this fish. I said, we got to find a way to get him in the boat. So I said, we'll put a second tail rope on him, and then two of us would pull on one and one on the other, and we managed to get him in the boat. And then I could take off and get into Catalina. And of course, when we got there, they always shoot a cannon off to let everybody know there's a boat bringing a fish in the way. And the word that got around that it was a huge fish. And so everybody's in towns on the dock. They always have the weigh station roped off so they can take pictures and weigh the fish and everything. So that was a pretty exciting story for the book, and that was one of the stories. And then I had one of the biggest bass that we caught here locally. Largemouth bass weighed 9 pounds and 10 ounces.
Wow.
On 8-pound test line, and that was a tough fight, but we got that one too. And of course, we let them go. I don't keep any bass; we put them back.
Wow.
And then we had another one that was an encounter with the singing group, the Platters. Have you heard of the Platters?
Yes, I have.
Well, we had Pat's roommate, Nancy, and her husband, John, lived in Houston. And so we met them in Branson, Missouri for a week. And we said, well, okay, Friday we got to pack up and go, because we had to drive to Springfield to catch a flight back to California, and they had a 2-day drive to Houston. So we said, we'll go to an afternoon show, then go out, eat dinner, and then come back to the room and pack and everything, because they had to take all the food and stuff with them. Mm-hmm. So after we went to the Cracker Barrel, and after we finished eating, John and I came out and sat on the porch in a rocking chair, and Pat and Nancy walked around inside the gift shop. And two guys came out the door, and one of them was telling the other one, why don't we go over here and play a couple of hands of checkers before we leave? And I said, here. I got up. I said, here, take my seat. There's a checkerboard right here. And I said, wait a minute. I said, he's got a white cane with a red tip. How are you going to play checker with somebody that can't see? I said, I'm going to have to referee this match. And so we had this little thing going. And then Pat's roommate came out the door. She says, you know who these guys are? I said, I don't have a clue. She said, they're the Platters. I said, oh, my word. I love to dance to their music. They were so great. And Rooster, who was the leader of the group, says, have you been to our show? I said, no, we got to go back to California in the morning. We got an early flight, and we don't have to. He said, you got to come to our show tonight. He said, Rooster, we can't come. You coming to our show tonight? He said, give me 15 minutes and I'll leave tickets at will call. So,
oh, wow.
So we went, got tickets. And of course, Branson, the seating is like thousands in these arenas. And so the ushers walked us all the way down to the front. We on the front row. There's nothing in front of us, just a stage.
Wow.
And so the show was terrific. And At the end of the show, Rooster came down off the stage with 2 long stem red roses. He gave one to Pat's roommate, Nancy. He gave one to Pat, and he danced with Pat in the aisle down there.
Oh, wow.
And it was so special. And then after, when the show's over in Branson, they always tell, come up to the lobby and we'll sign autographs and take pictures. No, I'm looking at this thousands. I said, there ain't any way for it. It'd take us 30, 45 minutes to get up to the lobby.
Right.
And I said, look, there's an exit door right over by the stage. I don't see a guard over there. Let's go out that door. So we went out that door, and here comes Rooster up the sidewalk. Where are you going? Rooster, we got to go back and Pat. And he said, no, you come up to the lobby. I said, Rooster, it'll be a line a mile long up there. He said, no. He grabbed Pat by the arm. He said, we're going to the lobby. I told John, I said, well, I guess we're going to the lobby.
So, I guess we're going.
So we went up and took photographs and signed autographs and everything. And it was just absolutely a wonderful encounter. But I think Rooster fell in love with Pat.
Sounds like it.
Everybody always fell in love with him. But and then I had some adventure stories. One, we went down to Mexico and went 120 miles below the end of the road and I just lost the brakes, rode down the mountain backwards and almost went over a cliff and it was an adventure. So that was a fun story. And then I had my remarks. I was invited to do the remarks at the graduation submarine school when I was 82 years old. And so that was wonderful. And at that event, when I talked to these young men, I talked to them about relationships. And did you see the movie City Slickers?
Yes.
With Billy Crystal, Jack Palance?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I said, Jack Palance was a bad, had a knife about 2 feet long, and he knew that he was going to cut their throats one night. So I said, one day he told Billy Crystal, he says, go out with me to round up a stray. We got to bring him back to the herd. And so Billy Crystal said, this is it. He's going to cut my throat. He's going to get me out here and kill me. So they ride off a ways. Jack Palance turns around in the saddle and looks at him. And he said, there's only one thing in life that counts, and he holds up a finger. And when I did at grad school at graduation, everybody laughed, of course. And I said, what is that? Your finger? And he said, no, that's for you to figure out. I said, well, for me, I know exactly what it is. It's relationships. There's nothing more important in life than relationships with your shipmates, your classmates, your neighbors, your wives, your family. Everything is relationships. And I talked about that extensively to those young men and how important it was. And anyway, that was some of the stuff in the first book. The second book was, I didn't plan to even do the first book. I got tricked into doing it. And then when I did that, everybody said, we can't wait for your next book. You got to do another book. And I said, I didn't plan to do a first book, much less a second one. But I said, I will, the most impressive people I'd ever met would have been my classmates at Annapolis. And I said, I know their stories. I know a lot of their stories. And I will do a book of stories of my classmates. And so that was my second book. And that included Brad Parkinson, who's the father of the GPS system. And right now we're working on getting a building at the academy named for him. Oh, wow. We're well underway, and I think we're going to make that happen. So it's pretty significant because it's all over the world. And I don't know if we'd ever had it without him for what Brad did. And then we had Charlie Duke, who spent 3 days on the moon, Apollo 16. Okay. And I got Charlie's story. And when I asked Charlie for a story, he said, I tell you what, he said, you interview me and you do the story. I said, okay. So I asked my 30-year-old granddaughter, Melanie, who's got a photographic memory. I said, you come help me take notes. So we both took a set of notes, and then I took those notes and put them together in the story and sent them to Charlie. And then Charlie embellished it a little bit. And then that's how we developed his story. And then he sent me about 20 photos from NASA on the moon and everything. And then we had Bob McElwee was an official in the NFL for 27 years, and he's the only one that's ever done 3 Super Bowls. Wow. And if you look in the book and you see his picture in there, you can say, I remember him. Nobody remembers a referee with a hands up like that, but he had some absolutely need knocking stories, so funny you wouldn't believe it. And I'll tell you one of them. Are you a football fan?
I am.
Do you know who Walter Payton was?
Yes.
Chicago. Okay. He said, my job as a head referee is I stand behind the quarterback and I don't watch anything except the quarterback until the play is over. And he said, I don't know if it's a touchdown, a completed pass, or blocking, or anything. He said, I watch the quarterback. He said, but before the play starts, I have several things I have to do. I have to check the play clock, the game clock, formations, substitutions, and a couple other things. But when I'm in Chicago, I have to reach around to my back pocket and see if my penalty flag is there. If it's not there, he said, I go to the huddle, I stand behind number 34, and I say, Walter, give me my flag back. And Peyton pulls it out from his jersey, gives it to him. And nobody understands or TV ever know what happened. But of course, all the guys in the huddle are laughing.
Right.
But Peyton liked to have fun. But Bob had some incredible stories. And
Wow.
we had a classmate that was Polish, Jewish, a Polish Jew. And the Nazis loaded him and his mother and father and sister in boxcars and took them to Auschwitz. And when they got there, the wind was blowing in that direction when they got off the cars, and they could smell the burning flesh from the ovens, and they knew they didn't have much of a chance. And they separated them into three groups. They put the women and the girls in a group, the men in a group, and then the boys in another group. And he later found out that his mother and his sister were executed immediately because they didn't want any Jewish women to produce more Jews. They actually executed about 12 million, and they were going to do every Jew in the world. That was their plan.
Wow.
And he after when the war was over, his father went in New York, and they sent him back home to Poland because they hadn't seen one another for 4 years. So they didn't know where they were. And eventually they got put back together, and he got on the ship and joined his dad, and then went to Texas, and he somehow got an appointment to Annapolis, and brilliant. He spoke 5 languages, and
Wow.
Art Aronson was his name, and that story is in the book. So there's some great stories in this book that you wouldn't believe. One editor says it's history at ground level, and I think that's what it is. Another editor, I think for the Naval Institute proceedings, said he said there's not enough information about naval officers. It all fades away. He said, but you've got it all here in your book.
Wow.
And you've got stories that you won't find anywhere else. And it's amazing. Two children were at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, when the Japanese attacked. And one was a little girl that was 4 years old. The other little boy was 8. And their stories are in the book of what they experienced that day. And another, Walt Mucal, people often ask, what was the story that made the best movie? I said, well, there were several stories in this book would make a great movie. But Walt's was amazing because he was born in 1933 in Shanghai. His father was a retired chief petty officer and worked at the embassy there. And when the Japanese invaded China and northern China started marching towards Shanghai and the bombs started coming down, then they had to get out of there. They went to the Philippines. Well, the problem was the Japanese were soon at the Philippines too. And they were prisoners of the Japanese during World War II, and his stories in the book. And eventually they were rescued by parachuters that came in with and operated with the Filipino guerrillas, and they shot the Japanese guards and got the prisoners out and got them into Amtraks and got them across the water behind U.S. lines. It's just very dramatic. A lot of bombing, a lot of strafing, and a lot of activity, and that would make a great one. And there's another one that was one of the first. Happened to be a passenger on a TWA flight 847 that was hijacked by by Hezbollah terrorists. And
Mm.
that story's in the book. And of course, when that happened, it was all over the news every night. It was because that situation until they got resolved. So it's just an amazing group of stories. One classmate was a prisoner in Vietnam for 5 years and 7 months and
Wow.
tortured and came close to dying a couple of times. But they're
Wow.
just unbelievable collection of stories.
That is
I put
crazy.
one in there called "Possum in the Church." Pat and I were both pretty active in the church, and one Sunday, the service had progressed to the point where he was well into a sermon, and the people in front of us kind of were rising up in their seats and looking down front. And I said, "That's really strange." It's just a group, they all up and then down, up and down 2 or 3 times, and finally I could see there was a possum down there in the front of the church. And the pastor stopped and he finally noticed it. He said, "Will the ushers please come down here and get this animal?" And everybody turned around and looked up the aisle. No one moved. No one moving. And he said, "Will somebody come get this animal?" And the ushers were about to come get that wild animal. And Pat elbowed me in the ribs and said, "Go get that animal." I said, okay. So next time I'm up my chair and I'm walking down front. I said, "I had an encounter with a possum once when I was a teenager, and I had on gloves. He ripped my gloves to pieces. They have very, very sharp teeth and very sharp claws, so
Mm.
they do a lot of digging."
Right.
And I said, "Well, I diverted him some with my left hand and reached down and got him by the scruff of the neck. And then I started up the aisle, and every eye is on me. They were afraid I was going to drop him or throw him at them or
It's
something."
awesome.
I went out the back of the church with him. It took him about 10 or 15 yards. And I said, "Now, okay, you don't ever come back in this church again. I'm letting you go. I want you to be a good little kitty now and get off and don't bother us again." And I went back in the church and I sat down and Pat said, "The whole time you were gone, the pastor was talking about you be the best fisherman in Huntington Beach. You're this outdoorsman from Georgia and all this stuff." I said, "Oh Lord, I know that's true." But that was funny. But
That's
anyway,
awesome.
that was some of the stories in the second book. And then the third book is How I Found Love, and it's got stories in here. Some boy meet girl, and some girl meets boy, and it's a story in here about two little girls and their relationships while they were children. And one was extremely handicapped, and that's an interesting
Mm.
story. There's my favorite story in the book is called "Baby in a Basket,"
Mm.
and a doctor and a nurse in a hospital in Manchester, Georgia, which is in at the foot of Pine Mountain in the Blue
Mm.
Ridge Mountains, and they were delivering a baby, and the doctor said, "This baby is going to be stillborn. Mother's been very ill," and when the baby came out, he handed it to the nurse. He said, "Put it on the table over there and come help me. We got to save the mother." So
Mm.
they labored for 2 hours trying to save the mother's life, and the mother died.
Mm.
And she turned around to clean up, and she said, "Doctor, this baby's still alive." She said, "No way." He said, "That baby's lungs aren't developed." He said, "Just leave it on the table there. I'll take care of it." She said, "No, doctor, I'm taking this baby home." He
Oh.
said, "No." He said, "And you don't want to do that." He said, "If you do that, it's going to die and you're going to be devastated." She said, "I'm out of here. I'm going home." And so she left and went home with the baby. And she lived a couple of blocks away in a small cottage and with her sister Sarah and her father. And they had a potbelly wood burning stove, and they put the baby in a tomato basket with a handle on it and put it next to the stove and wrapped in a blanket. And they started feeding it with eyedropper every 2 hours around the clock. They took shifts and took care of this baby. And after 6 weeks, the baby had recovered enough that the birth mother's sister, who lived in Brunswick, Georgia, came up and got the baby and took it
Wow.
home. She and her husband had no children. Now you got to understand, 1933 was the depths of the Depression, and
Right.
taking on the responsibility of raising a child in the Depression was expensive. And those times were tough then.
Oh yeah.
Hitler was rising in Europe, and the world was just devastated. People were knocking on doors, can I have a place of bread? Because he hadn't eaten for 2 days.
Right.
It was really tough. So they raised this child and gave him their name as Robert Dean Douglas, and
Hmm.
he graduated from Glenn Academy. He's now 92 years old, and he's one of my best friends.
Oh
And when
wow.
I asked him to write this story, his story, I expected it to be between he and Patsy. I didn't think it would be this. This was a shock when I got
Wow.
his story. I could not believe it. He said that this story has been eating at my heart for over 80
Oh
years because these people are the reason that I'm alive today.
yeah.
Otherwise, I wouldn't be here.
Wow.
So that's one of my favorite stories. But so there's some very unique stories in here, and I think people can get some inspiration. Some people have been through a couple of marriages and it didn't work out, and yet they met someone
Yeah.
almost by accident. And what I always tell people is be ready because you don't know when it's going to happen.
That's
I
right.
think the Boy Scout motto was be prepared. And I think you need to be prepared and don't give up hope. And there's always a chance that someone will be out there for you and you will find love some way.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. So, do you think that the experience of losing Pat influenced your writing?
Well, let's see. It definitely influenced me to write about her.
Hmm.
And that's definitely my love story. And I think I called it in the third book, My Delaware Blind Date. I think that was the name of My Delaware Blind Date.
It's appropriate.
And I just we had we had something they call. Have you heard of Marriage Encounter?
Yes, it sounds familiar.
It's a long time ago. I don't know whether they still do that. It was something that was going around for a while where couples went off site and they put them in separate rooms and you had to do something, write something, and you wrote and she wrote, and then you got back together, exchanged books, and read what the other wrote. So I think that was really the first times that I had ever really written emotionally, other than just regular letters.
Mhm.
But I did a lot of that, and I think, I mean, she was definitely a person I wanted to write about
Yeah.
because she's always on my mind, and she's
Yeah.
always nearby, and she's probably wondering how I'm making it through life without her.
Oh, I'm sure she's watching you. I'm sure she's right there with you, listening to you
Yeah,
tell stories.
but but I've got a lot of support, as I mentioned, and I think it's been helpful. I don't know what you'd do if you did not have support.
Yeah.
I think you have to create your support,
Yeah.
and I encourage people nurture your relationships. That's
Yes.
important, and you need to focus on nurturing your relationships, and you stay in touch. I had a guy I hadn't heard from in 25 or 30 years.
Hmm.
Last last year, he said, "I want to come visit you for a week in November." I'm
Oh.
saying, "What?" I said,
Okay.
"Okay." And so anyway, he came and he stayed about 4.5 days, and we had a good time, and it was enjoyable. But I stay in touch with people, even though I may never see them again,
Right.
because my relationship's so important. I always feel like I need others a whole lot more than they need me.
Hmm.
And
Maybe.
I don't know. I don't think I've ever accomplished anything myself. It's always been with others. And I enjoy teamwork, and I just approach everything as that we do this together. And Pat and I did everything together.
Yeah. So, with that said, what is one thing you wish you knew or wish you had done before Pat passed away?
Oh boy, what would I wish? I don't know. I don't know that there's anything. She had. I mentioned she was a good athlete, and
Hmm.
I know that her best sport was swimming, and her coach was Peter Dalen, who was probably the greatest swim coach this country's ever known.
Oh, wow.
He was he came back to her area in Pennsylvania to go to school on a GI Bill after World War II, and he coached their swim team.
Hmm.
And he went from there to Yale as assistant coach, and from there he went to the University of Southern California, and he coached there. He won 9 Division I national championships. He coached
Wow.
the men's Olympic team when Mark Spitz won the 7 gold medals, and he coached the women's Olympic team. So
Wow.
that's how she learned swimming, was under Peter Dalen. And
Wow.
I said that's probably the reason she was so competitive, because he was about the most competitive guy in the world. But yeah, I don't know. She had a lot of back trouble, and she told
Hmm.
me that one time she was doing a back dive from the upper board, and she hit the lower board,
Oh.
and I think that manifested in a back trouble much later in life. And she
Hmm.
had a number of surgeries, and nothing really solved it. It just she had a lot of pain all the time, and I don't know what we could have done. We just had a wonderful life together. We enjoyed doing it. We'd love to be together, and we like being close.
Yeah.
And I don't know that there's anything I could have done. If I could have solved her pain, that would have been.
Oh, of
I would have
course.
done that. But there was
Yeah.
nothing he could do. The last surgery was at Mayo, and they said we're going to fix it. And she had like 16 staples in her back, and she still had the pain, and nothing
Hmm.
took it away. So
Hmm.
she was a trooper, though. I mean, she was always, it was like getting ready for the game on the weekend, boy. She was always up to, I'm getting ready, I'm gonna, whatever I have to do, I'm gonna do.
Yeah.
And that was all her thing in life, was to get ready for the next thing. And
Hmm.
uh, but but I don't know that I could have done anything more than I did. I mean, I
Yeah.
loved her as much as anybody could love anyone,
Yeah.
and and I think she felt the same about me. Though I don't know why. I used to look at her, Pat, why in the world did you marry me? And she'd look at me like I was crazy or something. But but we had fun. I'll tell you another. When we got married and we went down to Treasure Island near Tampa
Hmm.
and St.
Hmm.
Petersburg for our honeymoon. And we came back to Georgia, and my brother said, "Why don't we go fishing in the Omaha Swamp?" And I
Hmm.
said, "Okay." I said, "Pat had never been in a swamp before."
Hmm.
And so Bobby got in a boat with a guide, and I got in another boat with Pat. And we were deep in this swamp, and we said, "Well, we probably ought to get out of here and get back." And so everywhere I ran the boat, we ran into a tree down over, and I couldn't
Oh.
find a canal or a way to get out. And Pat said, "You sure you're gonna find your way out?" I said, "You always do find a way out. I just keep going."
Yeah.
And all of a sudden she said she's looking over this way, and I'm looking this way. She said, "There's a snake over there." And I looked up, oh, I said, "That's a cottonmouth." And I took the oar and I whapped that snake. That's what Georgia boys are always busting. And she screamed and she said, "Don't ever do that again." I was going to jump overboard. I thought there might be another one on the other side, and we laughed about that. But I said, "You get used to being married to this swamp boy in Georgia." But but I had all kind of stories that we just did. We went everywhere together. We fished together, and just had so much fun doing everything. She was a wonderful dancer, and I loved to dance. And we went to dinner. We belonged to organizations. We belonged to Duplicate Bridge. We belonged to dinner groups. We did everything we did was pretty much together.
That's
And
awesome.
yeah, it was a good relationship.
So you know that you might recall that my platform is about death planning.
Yeah.
Did you and Miss Pat do any type of planning? Um,
Absolutely.
did you?
We did an estate plan in California, and we moved back to Georgia. Then we had to redo it because the laws are
Hmm.
different here. And so
Right.
so we had an estate plan, uh and it's going. So we had to execute part of it when she passed away, and we left a part of her IRA to the University of Delaware, and
Oh.
I established a scholarship fund in her name there.
Oh, that's
and
awesome.
I donate money to that every month, and their students is actually benefiting. And every once in a while, I get a note from one thanking me
Oh,
for that. And but it's completely endowed, and it's Patricia Metzler Paulk Scholarship Fund in the School of Education there.
wow.
So
That's so
so
that's an amazing legacy.
yeah,
That's so
yeah,
cool. So what
yeah.
is one piece of advice that you would give people who are thinking about doing death planning but haven't done it yet?
Well, I think you need to think things out, and what normally happens, somebody dies and everything is dumped on who's left, and
Hmm.
then it's panic time, and
Right.
uh, it's the more you can do ahead of time, the easier it can be on your heirs. And I think that's what you want to do. And I'm asking kids, what do you want in the house now? You got memos. You put your stick tape up behind it if it's something you want that you get, because we've got a lot of mementos that
Hmm.
maybe not worth a lot of money, but maybe kind of special.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
I think those are important. I know Pat had one of her friends, and her mother had died,
Mm.
and they just closed that house up and didn't touch it for a year. And
Wow.
Pat went with it, said, "Let's go over there and clean out." And so they went over and sorted out and helped her sort everything out. Now, when
Mm.
Pat died, a friend of mine, originally from Mobile, lives up in West Virginia now, Charlie's, and uh, and Charlie gave me some really good advice. He said, the first thing you do is you get the girls over there and you take all of her clothes, get everything and load it up in the cars and go give it to Goodwill, Salvation Army or something, but get all of that stuff out of the house. In other words, you clean up immediately, because if you don't, it's always there to remind you. You want to get those things out of there to help you as much as possible.
Mm.
So my advice is to do some thinking about that. And you're not going to get everything, but the more you can do, the better. And write notes. I said the best thing you could do is to write notes. And if you don't do anything other than throw them in a drawer, it's all there in a drawer, and you can look at them later. But you've
Right.
got it written down.
Yeah, that's great advice. I love that. Well, Mr. Jim, thank you so much for sharing about your life, about Miss Pat, and the work that you've done to share the stories of your life and of others along your life path. If people want to pick up a copy of your books, where can they find them?
The books locally, you can find them at the Submarine Museum. They carry our books. They probably sell more there than anywhere else. But of course, they're all on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and Apple, and you can find them there. And if they, I wish they'd contact me on Facebook. They can find me at Jim Paulk or James D. Paulk Jr., author, and
Awesome.
stay in touch. And I'd love to talk to my fans. We
Very
do a
good.
video. We do a video on Friday called Fishing Fridays,
That's
and
right.
it's a lot of people tune in and laugh at us.
Well,
But
you and your
Rachel,
manager.
yeah, we have fun.
Very good. So, all right. So I'll get your social information. I'll put it in the show notes so that anyone, if they want to find you on Facebook, they can do that. And of course, tune in for your Friday for your fishing stories. And then, so do you have any last words of wisdom for our listeners today?
Oh boy,
You shared a whole bunch. I mean, if
I
they would have to
I
save this and keep
I
listening to it because you dropped a bunch of nuggets of wisdom in this podcast for sure.
yeah, I think I mean I could talk all day, and you know that I don't know that I'm any wiser than anyone else. I've had a lot of experiences. I've done a lot of different things in my life. When I look back, I can't believe the things that I've done, that we've done. I'll put it that way, we've done. And the fundraising that we did for churches, the, the, the planning and the executing, uh, I think my advice is give back, because you've been given a lot. And in my case, I was given a tremendous education at the Naval Academy. It was my dream come true was to go to Annapolis, and I did that. And all my life, I felt like I owe humanity because
Mm.
they gave me this opportunity. And so when I'm ever asked to do something, I usually say yes. And I've been on many boards over the years, and I'm always willing to give back. And I think people should be willing to give back because even though we're deprived in so many ways, we're all in blessed in so many other ways.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, hopefully today's interview with Mr. Jim has given some food for thought and things to consider for your own life. If you found value in today's show, please like and share this episode. Please leave some love in the comments for Mr. Jim, and I'd love to hear of any other folks who have taken their grief and turned it into good for themselves and for others. And okay, friends, as you know, I like to say, death is inevitable, chaos is optional, and we'll see you next time on The Flip Side of Death.